here we are again. Last Stand at Papago Wells, Chapter 10. Not a very long chapter. Webb was standing close behind him when Kimbrough turned around. Webb was a man of 30, burned red by the sun. "We're fools," Webb was saying. "Pure damn fools. I say we ought to take the horses and run for it. If the others want to stay, let them. They can have it." "We couldn't do that," Kimbrough said, but his words carried no conviction, no force. He had been thinking of doing just what Webb suggested, for he did not want to die, nor did he want to remain here in the heat with no bath, no chance to shave, no change of clothing. It was no way for a gentleman to live. He wanted to take Jennifer and get out fast. Webb would be the man to help. He was not dangerous as Zimmerman was, but a follower, a man who would never act by himself. "No," Kimbrough repeated, "it wouldn't be right. I'd rather be alive a coward," Webb replied shortly. Coward. The word stiffened Kimbrough, shocked him. Immediately he began to reason. It would not be cowardice, for he had never wanted to stay, but to ride on, and to ride on might be more dangerous than staying. And he had nothing in common with these people, nor did he wish to have. He had allowed himself to be persuaded, and now he would merely resume his original course. It was simple as that. "What about it?" Webb persisted. He stepped closer to Kimbrough, and the gambler started to draw back in distaste. Then he held himself. "Why shouldn't we go?" Webb insisted. "There'd be more food and water for the others." Kimbrough turned away. "Later," he said. "We'll see." He walked swiftly away to the fire, which was the focal point of all their living these days. Men came and went from the fire, for it was the center of their lives, of their being. They drank coffee, even if it was now more than half mesquite bean coffee. They drank coffee and sat, for there was nothing else to do. The sky was growing pale now, pale lemon and gray. The rocks were black, the red rock of lava and the black rock of other flows. Soon the sun would rise, and it would be hot. It would be open and clear, and everyone would be visible, and there would be no chance for escape. Still no sign of Kate's. Jennifer stirred under her blanket, then sat up, brushing her hair back. Even now, after these brutal days in the desert, she still looked lovely, still seemed fresh, a bit drawn, but still beautiful. "He's gone," Kimbrough said. "Kate's is gone." "Gone?" She looked at him, trying to realize what the word meant. "Kate's? No. He's gone, I tell you. You'll see." Suddenly he was speaking with almost savage triumph. He talked so much about staying, about sitting tight, that he took off himself without so much as a word, says Kimbrough. "I don't believe it." Jennifer was suddenly on her feet. "He wouldn't do a thing like that. He's no coward." Coward? That word again. Kimbrough stared at her, almost with animosity. "Maybe he's just smart. That's what we all should have done." "He hasn't gone," Jennifer was suddenly sure. "Logan Cates would not leave us. I know he would not. He isn't that kind of man." Big Maria was sitting up. She stared around her, then hunched herself to her feet. She was very heavy, and she had made no effort to comb her hair or straighten her clothing. Her eyes seemed to have grown harder, and they looked from Jennifer to Kimbrough, and then up at the rocks. They were all coming around now. Junie was brushing her hair back into place, trying with no ineffectual hands to brush her dress into some semblance of shape. "Kate's is gone," Kimbrough said again. Junie looked her contempt and walked away from the group. Jim Beaupre picked up the battered coffee pot. He was gone, all right, but now he's back. They all looked at him, and Beaupre took his time. "He's back with enough sheep to keep us all eating a couple of days, if we go easy." "I don't believe it," Kimbrough said. "He's gone, and that's what we all should do, leave." There was a stir on the edge of the group. They parted to see him standing there, with the blood of the Indian he had killing staining his shoulder and shirt, and a thin red scratch along his cheek from the knife blade. He did not know it was there, had not felt it when it happened to him. He dropped the skin packed with chunks of meat and said, "I'm not gone and nobody's going. The one chance we've got is to stay right here." "Maybe," Kimbrough's anger suddenly flared, "maybe I'll go whether you like it or not." Cates merely looked at him. "All right," he said. "Go ahead. Go any time you like, but you'll have to walk." Kimbrough had started to turn away, then wheeled back. "Walk?" He took an angry step towards Cates. "I'll be damned if I'll... Why should I walk? I'll ride the horse I came with." "You deserve him," Cates replied coolly. "That horse won't make it to Yuma, but he'll make it part of the way, so you're not taking him. He's community property now." Grant Kimbrough stood very still, his hands at his sides. There was one thing Cates did not know, that he, Kimbrough, was a fast man with a gun, probably one of the very fastest. Kimbrough was thinking of that now. He knew he could kill Cates, and knew this was as good a time as any. "You try to take my horse from me," he said. "All those horses here, mine included," Cates replied, "now belong to the group until we get out of here. The strong must walk, the weak will ride, and at least one horse must be kept for carrying water alone. No man or woman has a right to a horse of his own or her own now." "We didn't agree to that," Taylor objected. "I'm sorry," Cates replied, "but it's necessary." He gestured toward the meat, changing the subject. "We'd best cook it. It won't keep in this heat." Abruptly he walked away. His weariness hit him suddenly, and when he found a shady spot he sat down heavily. With an effort he managed to get his boots off, and lying down was asleep at once. "Takes a lot on himself, doesn't he?" Webb muttered. Grant Kimbrough did not reply, but he was filled with impotent anger. Their only hope lay in flight, and if he had not crossed the desert to the west, he was sure that a man on a good horse could make Yuma in no time. Without the drag of those who must walk and those other women, they could make it through on fast horses. Getting out of the cul-de-sac, that was their defensive position, was the big thing. Once away, they could run for it, and Webb was ready to go. So he would plan it that way, prepare Jennifer to be ready for the break, and when opportunity came, they would ride out. If Cates objected, Kimbrough would kill him. He realized, been giving the contingency a lot of thought these past 2 days. The first thing was to talk to Jennifer. She would, he was sure, be only too anxious to go. Logan Cates awakened with a start. He was bathed in perspiration, and for a moment he did not know where he was. A blanket had been stretched from the rock to the ground, forming a crude shelter that allowed shade and some air circulation. He sat up and listened. There was a crackle from the fire, a distant murmur of voices, the sound of someone stirring about close by. He checked his pistols. These actions, the moment of listening to judge what was happening around him. The checking of the guns, all were second nature to him now. When he slid out from behind the blanket curtain, he resumed the boots that he had immediately put on again after returning from his midnight foray. Jennifer was at the fire. "You slept a long time," she said. "It's noon. Anything happen?" "Stiles is dead." "He's better off, but it's a hard thing to die here." "Why did you go out last night? You might have been killed." "We needed meat," Kate said. "What happened out there?" "Met an Apache whose luck had run out." Big Maria had moved herself closer to the rocks, near the place where Cates had seen her disappear that night. She kept a gun close to her at all times, and before Cates had finished his coffee, he could see by her actions that she was suspicious and ready for trouble. He must talk to Lonnie Foreman. The boy was solid, he had nerve, and he was a stayer. He could count on Foreman, probably Sheehan. Who else? Junie Hatchett, with perhaps Beaupre and Lugo. Conley was another question, but he seemed to be a solid citizen as to Jennifer. Lugo was at the fire, gnawing on a mutton bone. He glanced up at Cates, and his eyes went to the bloody shirt. It was like the Pima that he made no comment, asked no questions. The bloody shirt spoke for itself, and the Indian is not one to talk of the obvious or of needless things. Lugo knew that he had been in a fight out there in the dark. The fact that Logan Cates had returned and that the blood was not his own was sufficient evidence as to the outcome. "Who's with the horses?" Cates asked. "Kimbrough," Lugo said. "You watch horses." Logan Cates considered that, but saw nothing in it that was dangerous. It was true that Kimbrough had always held a position in the rocks or in the brush along the edge of the arroyo, but there were no assigned positions, and a man could choose his own. "Is he alone?" "A soldier's with him." Lonnie Foreman was hunched in the shade talking to Junie. He was stripped to the waist, and Junie was mending a rent in his shirt. Beaupre and Zimmerman were digging a grave for Stiles in the lower arroyo, not far from where the horses were. Webb paced restlessly. Kimbrough was busy with his own thoughts. Logan Cates picked up his Winchester, checked the load, and then climbed up in the rocks, noting the water level as he went by. Although the water had fallen considerably since their arrival, there was still enough if they did not stay too long. Conley was on watch in the rocks. "Nothing," he said. "Just nothing at all. I never seen so much of nothing." Heat waves shimmered, and the buzzards high against the brassy sky described long, loose circles. Nothing else moved. Cates sat down on a rock and mopped the sweat from his face. His clothing smelled of stale sweat and dust, and his eyes were tired of the endless glare of sun on sand and the rock. He laid the Winchester across his knees and swore softly. "My sentiments," Conley said. "I can't figure why I ever came to this country. My folks had them a good farm back in Kentucky. Right nice place. Used to be parties or dances every Saturday night, and folks come from miles around. Now here I am stuck in a rocky desert with every chance I'll lose my hair. Why does a body come to this country?" Cates took out the makings and began to build a cigarette. Sweat got in his eyes, and they smarted. "You got me, soldier, but you stay a while and it grows on you." "Not on me. If I get out of this fix, I'm taking off. I'm going to those gold fields and find myself a job. I know a fellow in Grass Valley." Ever hear a nicer name, Grass Valley? Makes a man think of cool green meadows and streams. Maybe it ain't like that, but I'd sure like to give it a try. Logan Cates lifted the cigarette to touch the edge of the paper to his tongue. When he saw movement, he dropped the cigarette and swung the Winchester. All he saw was a flickering movement, and Conley's body jerked sharply. He turned half around as if to speak to Cates, then fell tumbling over and over among the rocks as Cates' own shot followed the sound of the shot that killed Conley. Cates fired and saw his bullet kick sand. He fired again into the brush, then tried a shot at a shelf of rock, hoping for a ricochet into the concealed position from which the Indian had fired. On the instant, all were alert. Beaupre had run forward, lifting Conley from the rocks as if it were a child. It was no use. The soldier was dead. Two gone, Stiles and Conley. How many were to go? Out there again, the desert was a silent place, a haunted place. Zimmerman mopped his face and peered into the brush. When he lifted his hand to brush away the sweat, it was trembling. The death of Conley had shocked them all. It had come so suddenly, and that attractive, pleasant young soldier was smashed suddenly from existence. It was proof enough, if proof was needed, that their every move was watched, that the Apaches had made a tight cordon around them, watching, waiting. Suddenly the desert had become a place of menace. Its very silence was evil, its heat was a threat, the sinking level of the water was obvious to them all. Their food was growing less, and the forage for the horses was all but a thing of the past. The horses had eaten the grass down to the roots. Sparse as it had been, they had eaten the leaves and the mesquite meads. The faces of the men were taut, sullen, and frightened, as they waited in place, staring at the blinding glare of the sun-blasted sand and waiting for a target that never appeared. Even Sergeant Sheehan was feeling the pressure. He looked drawn and old now, and his square shoulders sagged a little. "They'll get us all, Cates," he said. were whipped. That was chapter 10. Last stand of Papago Wells. Love you. God bless.